I am Mariana Macedo.
Hello, I'm Ana Maria Jaramillo.
Today we will have our first guest on Wings Pushing the Glass Ceiling. Hi Alice, can you introduce yourself?
Hi all, I'm Alice. I'm a postdoc at the Department of Biology at the University of Washington, and I'm this year's president of the Women in Network Science Society.
As we mentioned in the previous video of introduction, we want to know things interesting about your research path more than the product of your research. So we will ask you some information about your responsibilities and how have you achieved success in your career.
You are the president of Women in Network Science. So how did you get involved in the organization in the first place? So before being president?
Before being president. So I only learned about Women in Network Science a few years ago when I went to a conference. I think it was Complanet in Boston. And there was a Women in Network Science evening hosted by the Society, which at that point was run by Brooke Wells and Sarah Sugars, and maybe a few other people as well. And so it was just a nice evening with kind of snacks and drinks and just a nice way to hang out and connect with other women in the field. And I really liked that because it had a very relaxed feeling to it that I normally don't have during conference networking. It kind of felt a little bit like I could let my guard down and just talk about what it's like to be a woman in the field. So I really liked that. When the pandemic hit and we all started working from home, I was feeling kind of the void of having the research community. And there were like a few things that kind of sparked the idea at that point. But what it boiled down to was that I started the Women in Network Science seminar series. So that was a way for me to kind of do some community work, which I missed doing at that point, connect with people that I like and in whose research I'm interested in, and also do something that kind of promotes women in network science.
I think the pandemic impacted your work. Did you stop it being productive? Did you have any problems like mentally, or was it just the lack of talking to people?
It felt very difficult because I'm a postdoc in the US, but my family is based mostly in Germany. And so with the pandemic starting, there was no way to go back home, see my family for over a year. And people at home got sick, and people at home, like my grandparents died during the pandemic, and I couldn't go and take part in the funeral. So all of that weighed really heavy on me. And I think it took me a while to kind of get back on track, but it definitely was challenging on like a basis of mental health, just to kind of keep going and be productive. So that was definitely a thing. This was my first postdoc. I came here and I didn't really know how things were supposed to go. And all I knew was things are not going as they are supposed to be going. Things are going differently. And I don't know what is kind of the best reaction in that situation. So in that sense, it was also really challenging. It wasn't that bad. So there's like this, we did some research. I did connect with some people. It just like all felt very kind of like an intense struggle to keep it going.
What you did that work for you to go through the pandemic, or working from home, or even like being on the postdoc?
Doing a postdoc is both a professional and a personal challenge. Professionally, it's a challenge because it is different from doing a PhD. There's a higher level of kind of independence involved, and basically you need to find that balance between, on one hand, being kind of adapt to the new research environment that you go in, which is probably very different to the one where you did your PhD in. And on the other hand, kind of bring in your own ideas and your own impulses, because you are very much a researcher in your own right now. You're not here to necessarily be shaped. You're here to shape the environment around you. And personally, a postdoc is often a challenge because it requires you to move to a different place in most cases, and it requires you to do so not necessarily for a long time frame. So for example, my postdoc here at UW is coming to an end. It was a 2-year stint, which especially with the pandemic felt really short. And I think 2 years is, depending on what field you're in, actually like a very standard time for a postdoc, but it's not very long to settle into any place. So that means that it can be stressful just in terms of settling in and settling out of a place. It can be stressful in terms of acquiring visas and then adjusting to a new situation. And it's especially stressful in the sense that, and this is not just my experience, I hear that from lots of people, that a postdoc can be a bit of a lonely time, because you go to a new place, you don't know any people yet, and by the time that you've kind of made your connections and you feel like you're settled in, it's already time to leave for the next stint again.
Alice, talking about networks, your social networks, we have a question. How is your work? Like, are you a more collaborative person, or like to lead more like solo projects, or how this collaboration network also help you to support all your movements and your paths?
Math tends to be a little less collaborative than maybe some of the other fields that are kind of part of network science. For example, the one big paper that came out of my PhD, that was a paper that has just me and my PhD advisor on it. On the other hand, there are projects that I did collaboratively at like the Santa Fe Summer School, or a project that we recently started at the Complex Networks Winter Workshop. What I haven't done yet, but I'd really like to do in the future, is to have these truly interdisciplinary collaborations, because most of the people that I work with have actually been mathematicians or theoretical physicists. And so one thing that I find really exciting about network science is that you have all of these different people from different backgrounds coming together. Some of my favorite papers in network science are actually papers that come out of big collaborative teams with like a truly interdisciplinary background of the people involved. One thing, one of my mentors during my PhD told me, academia is such a hard place to be around, but one of the few privileges that you have is that you can decide with who you want to work. So use that. And if there's people like who don't, like they kind of irk you or something and you don't feel like you're getting along with them, don't work with them. Just work with the people where you feel like you have a good synergy in the team.
I think this is a really good tip for our first video. Try to collaborate with people that you really like to work with.
Yeah.
Just coming back a little bit for your PhD, how was it? Like, what happened that you struggle on your PhD? What are the strategies that you put in place on your PhD?
I had a great team of advisors. My main research advisor was Mason Porter, but there was also like other people involved. Philip Maney was my second advisor. I had an industrial advisor because it was a kind of university industrially coupled project. The company was subsidizing my PhD, but had some influence in what type of research I would be doing. And I think for the first half of my PhD, I was in a way too cautious and too focused on doing things that the company was interested in. When I think things really took off in the second half, only when I kind of realized or decided that they're funding me to do a PhD, which means that I'm going to do a PhD, and whatever comes out of that, it might be interesting to them, but kind of the most important goal for these years is that I get a PhD out of it and that I grow as a researcher.
I have a question, Alice, regarding that.
Yeah.
Like, there was someone that helped you to take that decision, or was just on the way?
Two people that helped me make that decision in a like kind of very much pushing me forward way. So I did my PhD at the University of Oxford, so that was in the UK system where you have I think you usually have 3 or 4 years time, and then every year there's like basically like a small defense. And so when I did the second one of those, I was quite confident about my work going in, but I was absolutely destroyed by my committee. And so basically the message that I got from my committee is, this is all well and good what you did, but it doesn't have the creative aspect to it that a PhD should have. This feels very much like you did some job for the company, but you're not making the scientific contribution that we need to see from you to get a PhD. And so that was, at that moment, it didn't feel nice to get that feedback. But I think getting that feedback was giving me the push to then go to my advisors and say, this is not how I want to do things, because I want to have a PhD at the end of it. And that is the most important thing. So we're going to do now the thing that I really wanted to do, and that would actually have that aspect of creativity and originality in it, that where I'd feel comfortable that it, like, where I'd feel certain that it's going to earn me the PhD. So that is actually my shout out to Nivo Clary and Gesine Reinhardt for being kind of mean to me in my confirmation of status, which definitely paid off in the long run.
Sometimes I think when you are doing a PhD, you don't know like what is enough. Can you help us to understand what is enough for a PhD?
For a PhD in mathematics, you want to generate either a conceptually new tool in terms of, so we're talking applied mathematics, network science, so it could be something like a new tool of how to analyze or understand network data. It could be new model or new insight that you can get from modeling something on network. For me, I was working on things at the intersection between motifs in networks and dynamics on networks. There was a story that I could tell about, oh, we can run simple dynamics on a network, and we can actually say how each individual motif in the network contributes. And by doing that kind of very meticulously, we actually learned something about how we should view motifs, like should we count motifs that kind of overlap in different ways, as in should we count motifs that are separate? What is the relationship between motifs that are made up of paths in the networks, and what is the relationship to motifs that are made up of walks in a network? And so there were a lot of things that kind of fell into place when I was doing that research. And at the end of it, I had things to write down and said, this is a story that I really want to tell people. This is something where I would feel if somebody who's interested in that topic reads my paper, there's like actually like a new insight that they can get from looking at that. And I think on a very abstract level, that is where you want to go. You want to be able to come to a point where you can tell a story that people are interested in, and that's going to kind of make them rethink the things that they know.
Well, based on the evidence, we've seen that men tend to produce more than women based on different research that we've saw in the seminars that you lead and in other research areas. Why do you think this is happening still now?
I think you can summarize a lot of it as systemic bias, where there's a lot of things where, like, it's not big stones, but there's small stones thrown in the way of women, and they just kind of hamper you, and then it aggregates, and in a way you then end up with having more trouble being as productive as men. And these things have to do with caring responsibilities, with becoming pregnant, becoming a young mother, with sexism at the workplace, with different kind of expectations that society has with regards to how women and how men should behave in the workplace and in the family. Personally, I think one thing that affected me is that as a girl, I think more than my brother, I was learning to kind of only speak when I was confident that the thing that I would say would make a positive contribution. And so if I feel like if I don't feel confident that I have something to say, I don't say anything. And I think that is something that is not unique to me. That is like a sentiment that a lot of women share. That's how we've been raised, a lot of us. And it translates also in kind of my strategies of when and how I feel comfortable to start writing my papers. So I want to do my research very thoroughly and make sure that the thing that I want to write down, nobody has said it before. It's not just like an incremental process, and it's not wrong. Like I need to kind of check basically the whole realm of literature if I'm not kind of making a point that might just not be right. I feel like on average, we could use a little more of a cautious approach in publishing. But then like on an individual level, you kind of need to find that balance, because like eventually you want your ideas to be out there, and you don't want to sit on them for years and years and years just to make sure that they're absolutely right. So they need to be out there so that other people can engage and interact with them as well. But I think there's also like a gender issue there, and I definitely see that in my approach compared to the approach of some of my male colleagues when it comes to when our project's ready to be published.
So I have a question, like in which point are like you started to be more confident about your work?
I'm definitely exploring a lot. I try to get an overview of kind of the literature, that all of the literature that could be relevant to the ideas that I have, also to look kind of for interdisciplinary connections, which makes a lot of sense in network science, but it does take a lot of time to look at that. I've been trying to be a little bit more streamlined because, again, like especially with a 2-year postdoc, you can't sit on all of your ideas for more than 2 years' time. They need to be kind of wrapped up within the period of your research contract. And one piece of advice that I got that I try to implement sometimes these days is that to make a scientific contribution and to write a paper, you don't always need to kind of summarize and transform the field, or that shouldn't necessarily be your aspiration. It's enough when you read other papers and you feel like, oh, this is something that they might have gotten slightly wrong, or this is something that they could have done slightly better. I'm going to kind of work on that and kind of do the story of how they could have done it better. And this is the story that I might present. And it might not be like a groundbreaking paper, but it is, if it is better than what is currently available in the literature, it is something that people should know. So it's a story that you should put out there.
We can finish with some inspirational thoughts. So for women that are starting their career in research, or they are thinking on pursuing a PhD, so what are your inspirational tips and insights for people to go to academia?
So I'm going to start out with saying, if you are in that situation, ask for advice. Find people where you want to be in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years, and ask them, because that is really helpful, especially if you're a first generation student, you don't have anybody in your family to tell you what it's like to do a PhD. It's quite a unique experience, and it's good to hear from people beforehand what you're getting yourself into. Those people will also have advice on how to best apply. And there's like a lot of things, you learn them as you go along. Academia is a very interesting place to be. A lot of the rules of how to navigate through it are unwritten rules. So you'll learn them by talking to people. And I think that is the first step if you want to get into it. The second piece of advice that I have is that once you start your PhD, once you're admitted to a PhD program and you're doing it, a thing to keep in mind is that the PhD is about you. It's about your growth as a researcher. But once you're admitted to a program, somebody somewhere has thought that you have the potential to do it. Somebody somewhere believes in you. So you should believe in yourself too, and you should stand up for the things that you need to be successful and to thrive in your program.
Thank you so much, Alice, for being here. To all people that is watching the video, thanks for joining our channel. For future interviewees, please follow us in the WIN Society Twitter. And thank you so much again, Alice. See you later, Mariana.
Thank you. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Anna.